Mom, starting with your next paycheck, we're transferring all your money to my account. Those were the words my son Bryce spoke to me that Thursday afternoon while drinking coffee in my kitchen. He said it as if he were proposing something completely normal, as if he were doing me a favor, as if I were incapable of managing my own money at 62 years old. What he didn't know was that I had been a financial analyst for one of the biggest investment firms in the country for the past 35 years, managing portfolios worth hundreds of millions of dollars. What he didn't know was that I had more money than he could ever imagine hidden in accounts he would never find. What he didn't know was that I had been watching him, studying him, waiting for him to show me exactly who he had become. And that Thursday afternoon, he showed me everything I needed to see. I stared at him across my kitchen table, this man who used to be my little boy, and I didn't say anything for a few seconds. I just searched his eyes for an explanation, for some sign of the child I had raised, the boy I had sacrificed everything for. But I found nothing. I only saw that calm smile, that confidence of a person who knows he's in control, who believes his mother is too weak, too old, too stupid to see what he's really doing. So I took a deep breath and told him yes, that it seemed fine, that I trusted him completely. Bryce's smile widened. It was the smile of a predator who thinks he's caught his prey. He stood up, gave me a quick mechanical kiss on the forehead, one of those kisses that mean absolutely nothing, and told me it was for the best. He said I wouldn't have to worry about a thing, that he'd take care of everything, that it was for my own good. Those words, for my own good, floated in the air long after he'd left my house, hanging there like poison gas, slowly filling every corner of the space where I had raised him alone. That very evening, like every Friday for the past 3 years, Bryce came back. Not alone, but with his wife, just as he always did. He arrived expecting me to have dinner ready, the table set hot, and free food waiting for them, as had been the routine every single Friday. I heard them arrive. I heard their footsteps at the entrance. I heard the key I'd given him turning in the lock. I heard the door open. And then I heard the scream. It was a high-pitched, desperate sound, the scream of someone who'd just seen something they never expected to see, the cry of someone realizing things weren't going to be the way they thought. I remained seated in my chair in the empty kitchen, in the empty house, listening to that scream echo against the bare walls. I didn't move. I didn't go to see what was happening. I already knew exactly what was happening. I had sold everything. Every piece of furniture, every decoration, every comfort they had come to expect when they walked through my door. Bryce rushed into this kitchen, his face pale, his eyes wide open like saucers. His wife followed him with the same expression of shock and disbelief painted across her features. "Mom!" Bryce yelled, his voice cracking with panic and rage. "Mom, what did you do? Where is everything? Where's the furniture? Where's the TV? Where's the couch? Where are the dishes? Where is everything that was here?" I looked at him calmly, with a self-possession I didn't know I had, with a coldness that felt foreign and yet completely natural. I told him in the softest voice I could find that I had sold a few things, that I needed the cash. After all, if he was going to handle my finances, I needed to make sure I had some money on hand first. Didn't I? It only made sense to liquidate some assets before transferring control of my income to someone else. His face changed from pale to red, flushed with pure fury. He took a step toward me, and for the first time in my life, I saw my son for what he truly was. Not the boy I had raised, not the young man I had helped build his life, but a stranger. A stranger who looked at me with contempt, with rage, with something that dangerously resembled hate. "You're crazy." He snapped, his voice sharp as broken glass. "You are completely out of your mind. How could you sell things without consulting me first? This is insane. Now, how are we supposed to watch TV when we come over? How are we going to be comfortable here? Where are we supposed to sit?" That last sentence changed everything. How are we going to be comfortable here? Not how are you going to be comfortable? "Mom, not are you okay? Do you need help? Is something wrong?" He wasn't worried about how this affected me, about whether I had a place to sleep or sit or eat. He was worried about them, about their comfort, about their convenience, as if my house were an extension of theirs. as if my possessions existed solely for their benefit, as if I were simply the caretaker of a free restaurant and entertainment center they could visit whenever they pleased. His wife stepped closer, her heels clicking on the bare floor with sharp, accusatory sounds. She looked at me with those eyes that always seemed cold and calculating eyes, that had never shown me genuine warmth in all the years I'd known her. She said something I will never forget, words that crystallized everything I had been slowly realizing over the past few years. She said I was being selfish, that I was only thinking about myself, that they came every week to keep me company, to make sure I was doing well. And this was how I repaid them. Selfish. The word hung in the air like an accusation, like a verdict. Me, the woman who had worked double shifts for years so Bryce could go to college. The woman who had given up on rebuilding her life after his father abandoned us because she didn't want her son to grow up with a stepfather. The woman who had lived in small apartments, worn old clothes, and eaten the bare minimum so he could have everything he needed, everything he wanted, everything other kids had. Selfish. Bryce stood there looking at me as if I were a problem he needed to solve, an obstacle he needed to remove. And then he said something that would have broken me just weeks ago, but now only confirmed everything I had suspected. He said maybe it had been a mistake to propose the bank account transfer, that maybe I wasn't in any condition to make good decisions, that perhaps I needed more help than he thought. More help. The words were carefully calculated, but the meaning was clear. He was saying I was senile, incompetent, that I needed to be controlled like a child. I stood up from my chair slowly, deliberately. I looked at both of them and told them in a voice that came out louder than I expected, stronger than I'd heard from myself in years, that dinner was not ready, that there was no dinner, and that if they were hungry, they could go eat somewhere else. For the first time in 3 years of Friday night dinners, they would have to pay for their own food. The silence that followed was thick, heavy, oppressive. Bryce stared at me as if he couldn't believe what he just heard, as if I had suddenly started speaking a foreign language. His wife let out a dry, bitter laugh and mumbled something about respect and gratitude, about how this generation didn't understand what they owed their elders, about how disappointed she was in me. And then Bryce spoke the final line, the one I still hear in my head when I close my eyes at night, the one that severed whatever thin thread of maternal hope I'd been clinging to. He said with a coldness I'd never known him to possess that I should be careful, that a woman my age alone without family who truly cared about her could end up in a very bad way. He said he was the only thing I had, and I should remember that before doing anything stupid. The threat was barely veiled, wrapped in concern, like a knife hidden in silk. They left. They stormed out of my house, slamming doors, leaving a trail of rage and veiled threats echoing in the empty rooms. I heard them get into the car, heard the engine start with an angry roar, and listened as they drove away, tires screeching slightly on the pavement. I stood there in my empty kitchen, in my empty house, feeling something inside me permanently shatter. But it wasn't sadness I felt. It wasn't desperation. It wasn't the crushing loneliness they probably expected me to feel. It was something different. It was clarity. It was the absolute certainty that my son didn't love me, that perhaps he never had, at least not in any way that mattered, that I was just a resource to him, a source of money, food, and convenience, an ATM machine that occasionally needed maintenance but was otherwise expected to function without complaint. I sat back down in my chair. I looked at the bare walls of my living room through the kitchen doorway. I looked at the empty spaces where furniture I'd bought with my labor and effort once stood. And for the first time in a very long time, I smiled. Because Bryce didn't know something crucial. He didn't know I hadn't sold the furniture for money. I had sold it to send a message to see how he would react, to confirm what I already suspected deep down in my heart. And he had reacted exactly as I expected, with rage, with indignation, with the attitude of someone who feels entitled to another person's things, another person's life, another person's entire existence. That night, as I sat in the darkness of my empty house surrounded by echoes and shadows, I made a decision. I wasn't going to scream. I wasn't going to cry. I wasn't going to beg or plead or try to explain myself. I was going to do something much more powerful. I was going to observe. I was going to wait. I was going to let Bryce believe he had won, that he had intimidated me, that his threats had worked. And then when he least expected it, when he was most confident, most sure of his control over me, I was going to show him who Eleanor Johnson truly was. Not the submissive mother he thought he knew, not the weak old woman he could manipulate and control, but the woman who had survived a broken marriage, poverty, and grueling hard work. The woman who had built a secret fortune while appearing to struggle. The woman who knew exactly how to protect herself, how to plan, how to execute. The woman he should never, ever have underestimated. There was a time when I believed being a mother was enough, that the love I gave would be naturally returned as if it were a universal law, as if the world operated on fairness and reciprocity. I believed that the sacrifices I made every day would build something solid, something unbreakable between my son and me. I believed that blood was thicker than water, that family meant something beyond genetics, that the years I spent raising him would matter when he became an adult. How wrong I was, how naive, how foolishly, dangerously optimistic about human nature. Bryce was born on a stormy night 34 years ago. The rain had been coming down in sheets, thunder shaking the windows of the small apartment I shared with his father. His father, the man who had promised me a life together, who had sworn we would build something beautiful, left when the boy was barely 2 years old. He said he wasn't ready to be a dad, that he needed to find himself, that he felt trapped and suffocated. He said I would understand someday. I never understood. But I also didn't wait for him to return. I didn't waste my time or energy hoping he would change his mind. I was left alone with a small child, a 2-bedroom apartment I could barely afford, and a secretarial job that paid $800 a month. It wasn't enough. It was never enough. The rent alone was $550. Utilities were another $100. Food, diapers, clothes for a growing boy, it all added up faster than the money came in. So I got a second job cleaning offices at night. I would leave Bryce with my neighbor, Mrs. Bertha Washington, an older lady who charged me $50 a week to watch him. I worked from 7 in the morning until 6 in the evening at the office, typing letters and filing documents and answering phones for executives who made more in a day than I made in a month. I'd come home, feed Bryce whatever I could afford to make bathe him in the small tub that was always slightly cracked, put him to bed with a story I was usually too exhausted to finish, and then head out again at 9 at night to clean buildings until 2 in the morning. I slept 4 hours and started all over again. I did this for years, so many years, that they blurred together into one endless cycle of exhaustion and determination. I remember Bryce coming home from school one day when he was 8 years old, his face red from crying. The other kids had made fun of his shoes, generic store-brand sneakers that cost $15. He wanted the name brand ones, the ones all the popular kids wore, the ones that cost $100. I earned maybe $1,200 a month between both jobs after taxes. $100 was almost all the money I had for groceries for 2 weeks. But I bought them for him. I didn't want my son to feel less than anyone else. I didn't want him to know what it felt like to be poor, to be different, to be the kid everyone made fun of. I ate rice and beans for an entire month to pay for those sneakers. Plain white rice and canned beans, sometimes with a little hot sauce if I was feeling extravagant. I lost weight. My clothes hung looser on my frame. But Bryce walked into school with those $100 sneakers, and he came home smiling, and I told myself it was worth it, that his happiness was worth my hunger, that his acceptance was worth my sacrifice. When Bryce turned 18, he wanted to go to a private college. Not the state university that would have cost a fraction of the price. Not the community college where he could have gotten his basics done for almost nothing. He wanted the prestigious private institution that cost $10,000 a year. I didn't have that money. I didn't even have a tenth of that money. My savings account, which I had been trying to build for years, had maybe $3,000 in it. But I went to the bank and took out a loan. The bank officer looked at my income statements and raised his eyebrows. He asked if I was sure I could afford the payments. I told him I was sure. I told him my son's education was the most important thing in the world to me. He processed the loan, and I signed papers that committed me to payments I could barely make. I went into debt for 4 full years of education debt. I ended up paying off over 10 years. 10 years of monthly payments that took money I needed for myself, for my own future, for the retirement I should have been building. Bryce graduated with honors. He got a good job at a marketing firm making $6,000 a month right out of college. $6,000. double what I made after 30 years of working 2 jobs after decades of exhaustion and sacrifice. And I was happy. I was so happy. I thought he could finally build his life. I thought I had finally done my job as a mother well. I thought all those years of struggle had been worth it, because I had produced this successful, educated young man who was going to do great things with his life. But Bryce didn't move out right away. He said he wanted to save money, that he wanted to have a solid base before becoming independent. He said the job market was tough, and he needed to build up his savings before he could afford his own place. I told him, of course, this is your home, you can stay as long as you need. I meant it. I wanted him to be financially stable. I didn't want him to struggle the way I had struggled. He stayed 5 more years. 5 years where I kept working, both my jobs, kept paying the rent, kept buying the groceries, kept covering the utilities. 5 years where Bryce saved every single penny of his $6,000 monthly salary because he didn't have to pay for anything. Not rent, not food, not electricity, not water, not internet, not cable. Nothing. He lived completely free while I continued to work myself to exhaustion to maintain the home that sheltered us both. When he finally left, it wasn't to rent an apartment like most young people his age. It was to buy a house. A $300,000 house in a nice neighborhood with good schools and tree-lined streets. A house that he paid for in cash because he had saved all his money during those 5 years of living completely free in my home. Every month for 5 years, he had deposited his entire paycheck into his savings account. 72 months times $6,000. $432,000 minus whatever small personal expenses he had. He had built his entire down payment and more on my back. I was proud when he told me. I told him I was so proud of him, and I was. I thought I had done well to help him get started in life. I thought that now that he had his own house, his own space, maybe he could help me a little. Maybe I could finally quit one of my jobs. Maybe I could work less. Maybe I could rest a little. I was 58 years old, and I was so tired in my bones, tired in my soul. But that conversation never happened. Bryce never offered to help with my rent. He never offered to buy me groceries. He never suggested I could work less now that he was financially stable. He moved into his beautiful house and started his beautiful new life, and I continued working. My 2 jobs continued, struggling to make ends meet, continued living in the same small apartment I'd lived in for decades. Bryce got married 2 years after moving out. His wife was named Jennifer, an elegant woman with perfect hair and perfect nails and perfect clothes. She was one of those women who always looked put together, who always spoke in a tone that sounded polite on the surface, but hid something colder underneath. I noticed from the start that she looked at me differently than Bryce did. Not with love or even affection, but with a kind of assessment, as if she were calculating my worth and finding it lacking. As if she were measuring me against some standard I couldn't see and determining I didn't measure up. At the wedding, which cost $30,000 money, I knew came from Bryce's savings that he'd built, living rent-free in my home. I sat at a back table, not at the head table with the family, not even at a table close to the front. I was seated in the back corner, partially hidden behind a column at a table with distant relatives and family friends I'd never met. Bryce explained it was because there were a lot of important people there, clients from his work, and they needed the prominent tables for them, for networking purposes, for his career. I said I understood. I smiled in all the photos they asked me to be in. I danced when they played the mother-son dance, though Bryce seemed distracted the whole time looking over my shoulder at his new wife and his important friends. And I went home alone that night to my small apartment, feeling strangely empty, like something had ended that I hadn't been prepared to lose. After the wedding, Bryce's visits became less frequent. Before, when he lived with me, and even right after he moved out, he came to see me 2 or 3 times a week. We'd have dinner together, watch television, talk about his work and his life. But after he got married, the visits dropped to once every 2 weeks, then once a month, then even less. And when he did come, he was always in a hurry, always looking at his phone, always with some excuse to leave early. A meeting he had to prepare for. Something Jennifer needed him to do. Errands that couldn't wait. I didn't say anything. I didn't want to be the heavy mother, the complaining mother, the mother who didn't understand her son had his own life now. I had been raised to believe that a good mother was one who didn't burden her children, who didn't make demands, who understood and accepted and made herself small and unobtrusive. So I smiled and said I understood and watched him leave earlier and earlier each visit. But then something changed. About 3 years ago, Bryce and Jennifer started coming on Friday nights. Every Friday, always around dinner time, always unannounced, always expecting me to have food ready. At first I was delighted. I thought Bryce finally wanted to spend time with me again, that he finally missed me, that maybe Jennifer had encouraged him to maintain a relationship with his mother. So I cooked his favorite dishes every Friday. I set the table nicely with the good plates I'd been saving. I bought dessert from the bakery, even though it was expensive. I made everything perfect because I was so grateful to have him back, even if it was just for a few hours a week. But I started to notice something. I noticed Bryce never came alone anymore. He always brought Jennifer, and I noticed they never came to chat to catch up to actually spend time with me. They came to eat. They arrived, they sat down, they ate quickly and efficiently, like they were refueling, and then they left. Sometimes they stayed an hour, sometimes less. The conversation was superficial, mostly about their work or their friends or plans they had that didn't include me. I also noticed he never brought anything. Never a bottle of wine to share, never a dessert to contribute, never flowers or a small gift, never money to help with the cost of the food, nothing. He just arrived, expected everything to be ready, consumed what I had prepared, and left. Like I was a restaurant, a free restaurant that existed solely for his convenience. One night after they left, I sat at my kitchen table and calculated how much I had spent on the dinner. Between the chicken, the vegetables, the rice, the bread, the dessert. It came to about $45. $45 I didn't really have to spare. $45 that meant I would have to work extra hours at my cleaning job to make up the difference. And I realized something that made my chest feel tight and my breath come short. I realized that for Bryce, I had become a service, not a mother, not a person with feelings and needs and struggles, just a free service, a convenience he could access whenever he wanted. I began to notice other things, too small things that added up to a larger picture I had been refusing to see. I noticed that when I asked him for help with something, he always had an excuse. When I needed him to take me to the doctor because my car was making concerning noises and I was afraid to drive it on the highway, he was too busy. Work deadline. Important meeting. Sorry, Mom, maybe next time. When I mentioned my refrigerator was making strange noises and I was worried it would break soon, and I didn't know how I would afford to replace it, he told me I should just buy a new one. Just buy a new one, as if I had $500 sitting around for emergencies. I didn't. I barely had enough to make it to the end of each month. After rent and utilities and food and the endless small expenses that come with existing, I had maybe $50 left over. Sometimes less, sometimes nothing. Sometimes I went into the negative and had to borrow from the next month's budget, creating a cycle of deficit I could never quite escape. But the worst moment, the moment that should have opened my eyes completely if I had been willing to see, was my 60th birthday. My 60th birthday. A milestone. A significant marker of a life lived. I had hoped maybe foolishly that Bryce would do something special. Maybe take me to dinner. Maybe throw me a small party. Maybe just spend real time with me, not the rushed, distracted visits that had become our norm. Bryce arrived 2 hours late with no gift, no card, no explanation beyond a vague mention of traffic. He stayed 20 minutes. 20 minutes on my 60th birthday. He ate a slice of the cake I had bought for myself because I didn't want to spend the day completely alone. He checked his phone at least 5 times while we talked. And then he left saying he had to get home. Jennifer was expecting him. They had plans. I cried that night. I cried like I hadn't cried in years, maybe decades. Deep, wrenching sobs that came from somewhere primal in my chest. Because I finally understood something I had been denying for too long. Something I had been making excuses for, explaining away, refusing to acknowledge. I understood that to my son, I was no longer important. I was no longer a priority. I was just a resource, something that was there available, waiting to be used when he needed it. And the worst part, the part that made me cry even harder, was that I had allowed it. I had set this pattern. I had never asked him for anything. I had never told him I felt used. I had never told him I needed more from him than just 20-minute visits and Friday night dinners where he barely looked at me. I had never set boundaries because I was afraid. Afraid that if I complained, if I asked for more, if I demanded the respect and consideration I deserved, he would disappear completely. And the idea of losing my son, even this version of my son who barely saw me, terrified me more than anything else. So I continued being the convenient mother, the silent mother, the mother who was always there, who always had the door open, who never caused trouble, who never made demands, the mother who made herself smaller and smaller until she was barely visible. Until that Thursday afternoon. Until Bryce told me he wanted to manage my money. Until he sat in my kitchen with that calm, confident smile and told me he was going to take control of my paycheck. Something inside me woke up then, something that had been dormant for years, maybe for my entire adult life. A small but clear voice that told me this wasn't right, that this was wrong, that this was the beginning of something much worse. But even then, even with that voice whispering urgently in my head, even with every instinct screaming at me to refuse, I told him yes, because I still had hope. I still wanted to believe my son loved me. I still wanted to believe he would protect me, that he would do the right thing, that somewhere inside him, the boy I raised still existed. How foolish I was. How desperately, pathetically foolish. The following Monday, Bryce came to my house with papers, lots of papers, a thick folder full of official-looking documents with small print and blank signature lines. He spread them out on the kitchen table with that same smile, that same air of someone doing me a tremendous favor. "Mom, this is simple," he said, his voice smooth and reassuring like a salesman. "I just need you to sign here, here, and here. These are the documents, so I can have access to your account, so I can automatically transfer your salary every month. That way, I'll take care of paying your bills, managing everything. You won't have to worry about a thing. No more stress about money. I'll handle it all." I looked at the papers spread across my table. They were bank forms, authorization forms, legal documents with language that seemed designed to confuse rather than clarify. I read the fine print, the parts most people usually ignore, the small gray text that fills the bottom of pages. And I saw something that made my blood run cold in my veins. It wasn't just access to my account. It wasn't just permission to help me pay bills. It was full power of attorney. Complete financial power of attorney. It was the legal authority to make transfers, to close accounts, to make investment decisions, to control every aspect of my financial life on my behalf without requiring my consent for individual transactions. "Bryce," I said slowly, my voice careful and measured, "this says you'd have total control over my money, complete control. This isn't just helping me pay bills. This is you having absolute authority over every financial decision in my life." He nodded as if it were the most normal, reasonable thing in the world, as if what he was asking for was as simple as borrowing a cup of sugar. "Yes, Mom, it's easier that way, more efficient. That way I can handle everything without having to call you and ask for authorization every time something needs to be done. It's for practicality. It makes the whole process much smoother." Practicality. That word echoed in my head, bouncing around like a pinball. Practicality for whom, I wondered. But I didn't say it out loud. I kept my face neutral, my expression blank. I had learned over the years of working with executives and wealthy clients in my real job, the job Bryce knew nothing about how to hide my thoughts, how to keep my reactions invisible. I took the pen he offered me. I held it in my hand, feeling its weight, and for a moment, I was about to sign. I was about to give him everything, because that's what I had always done. Trust, surrender, believe, give him what he wanted because he was my son, and surely he had my best interests at heart. Surely the boy I raised would never truly harm me. But then I remembered Friday night. I remembered his face contorted in fury when he saw my empty house. I remembered his words, the barely veiled threat about a woman my age ending up in a bad way without family who cared. I remembered how he had looked at me with contempt and rage, as if I were an obstacle to something he wanted rather than a person he loved. I put the pen down on the table. The small click it made seemed very loud in the quiet kitchen. "You know what, Bryce? Give me a few days to think about it. I want to read everything carefully. I want to be completely sure I understand what I'm signing. This is a big decision. I need time." His expression changed for just a fraction of a second. A flash of irritation, quickly suppressed, but not quickly enough. I saw it. I saw the mask slip for just a moment before he smiled again. "Mom, there's nothing to think about. This is simple. It's just paperwork, standard stuff. But okay, if you want to take a few days, that's fine. No rush. Take your time." But his body language said something different. His jaw was tight. His fingers drummed on the table. He gathered up the papers quickly, a little too quickly, and put them back in the folder. He left it on my table, though, as if assuming I would eventually sign them anyway, as if my resistance was just a temporary obstacle. After he left, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, listening to the sounds of the city outside my window, and something inside me kept screaming that this was not for my good, that this was not help, that this was the beginning of something I wouldn't be able to reverse once it started, that if I signed those papers, I would be handing my son the keys to destroy me completely. The next morning, I did something I should have done years ago. I went to my real office, not the fake secretarial job I'd told Bryce about the convenient fiction I'd maintained to explain my modest lifestyle. I went to Sterling Financial Group, where I had worked as a senior financial analyst for the past 35 years, where I currently managed investment portfolios worth over $800 million for high net worth clients, where I earned a salary of $320,000 a year, plus bonuses that sometimes doubled that amount. Yes. Eleanor Johnson, the poor struggling mother with 2 jobs, was actually one of the most successful financial analysts in the city, and Bryce had no idea. I had built this lie carefully over the years, constructed it brick by brick with such precision that not even Bryce suspected. When he was young, when he still lived with me, I told him I worked as a secretary at a financial firm. It wasn't completely untrue. I did work at a financial firm. I just left out the part about being one of their top analysts. I left out the part about the corner office. I left out the part about the salary that put me in the top 5% of earners in the country. Why did I lie? Because I wanted to know who my son really was. I wanted to see if he would love me, help me care for me when he thought I was struggling. I wanted to know if the values I tried to instill in him, the lessons about compassion and family, and taking care of those who sacrificed for you, had actually taken root. So I maintained the fiction. I dressed in cheap clothes. I drove an old car. I lived in a modest apartment, and I watched. What I saw over the years broke my heart in slow motion. I saw a son who never offered to help when he thought I was struggling, who never said, "Mom, let me pay your rent this month," or "Mom, let me buy the groceries," or "Mom, you've worked so hard, let me take care of you now." Instead, I saw a son who took and took and took, who lived rent-free for 5 years, while I supposedly struggled with 2 jobs, who never once seemed to notice or care that his mother was exhausted. My colleagues at Sterling Financial knew about the situation. Margaret Chen, who had the office next to mine, had urged me for years to tell Bryce the truth. "Eleanor, this experiment has run long enough," she'd said just last month over lunch. "You've proven your point. He's shown you who he is. Now protect yourself." But I hadn't been ready to accept it. Some part of me kept hoping Bryce would surprise me, would suddenly wake up and realize what he should have been doing all along. That part of me died last Thursday when he asked for control of my bank account. I sat in my office that Tuesday morning and pulled up my financial records on my computer. Multiple accounts at different banks, investment portfolios, real estate holdings. I owned 3 rental properties that brought in steady income. I had a retirement account worth over $2 million. My total net worth was somewhere around $4.3 million. And my son thought I was a struggling secretary who could barely make ends meet. I called my personal attorney, Richard Morrison, a man I'd worked with for 15 years on estate planning and asset protection. "Richard, I need to see you today. It's urgent." His assistant fit me in at 2 o'clock. I sat across from his massive mahogany desk and told him everything. About Bryce's request, about the power of attorney documents, about the Friday night dinners, and the veiled threats and the slowly dawning realization that my son had been using me for years. Richard listened without interrupting, his fingers steepled under his chin. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair and said, "Eleanor, you need to understand something. If you had signed those documents, your son would have had legal access to everything, every account, every asset, everything you've built over your career. He could have drained it all, and by the time you realized what was happening, it would have been too late." "I know," I said quietly. "That's why I'm here." "What do you want to do?" I thought about it for a long moment. I want to set a trap. I want to see exactly how far he'll go, and then I want to protect myself completely. Richard nodded slowly. "I can help you with that. But Eleanor, you need to be prepared for what you might find out. Sometimes it's worse than we think." "It can't be worse than what I already know," I said. "I was wrong about that." Richard helped me set up what he called a honeypot account. We opened a new checking account at a different bank and transferred $50,000 into it. Enough money to be tempting, but not enough to devastate me if it disappeared. We set up online access with a username and password. I would accidentally leave where Bryce could find them. And we set up alerts for any transaction over $100. "If he accesses this account without your permission, we'll know immediately," Richard explained. "And we'll have documented evidence of financial fraud. That becomes important later if we need to take legal action." I went home that evening and did something that felt both theatrical and necessary. I wrote down the username and password for the honeypot account on a piece of paper and left it on my kitchen counter, partially hidden under a magazine, but visible enough that someone looking around would find it. Then I called Bryce. "Hi, honey," I said, making my voice warm and apologetic. "I've been thinking about what you said, about managing my money. And I think you're right. I think I do need help. Can you come over tomorrow? I want to talk about it." I could hear the smile in his voice. "Of course, Mom. That's great. I'm so glad you're being reasonable about this. I'll come by tomorrow afternoon." He arrived at 3 o'clock on Wednesday, right on time with Jennifer. I hadn't invited her, but apparently she came as part of the package now. They sat at my kitchen table and I served them coffee in my mismatched mugs, playing the part of the humble, struggling mother perfectly. "I've been thinking a lot about what you said," I told Bryce. "And I realize you're right. I am getting older. Managing money is stressful. Maybe it would be better if you handled things." His face lit up with what looked like genuine pleasure, but I could see the calculation behind his eyes. "I'm so glad you see it that way, Mom. This is really for the best." "I just have one concern," I said carefully. "The full power of attorney seems like a lot. What if we start smaller? What if I give you access to just one account first and we see how it goes?" I watched his face carefully. A normal son, a son who genuinely wanted to help, would have agreed immediately, would have said, "Of course, Mom, whatever makes you comfortable." But Bryce's expression tightened almost imperceptibly. "Mom, that doesn't really make sense. If I'm going to manage your finances properly, I need access to everything. Otherwise, it's just more complicated." "But this way, we can make sure it works smoothly," I pressed. "And then later, if it's going well, we can add the other accounts. Doesn't that seem reasonable?" Jennifer spoke up, then her voice sharp. "Ellie, I don't think you understand. Bryce is trying to help you. He's a busy man. He doesn't have time to manage things halfway. Either you trust him or you don't." The ultimatum was clear. All or nothing. Complete control, or they walk away. I looked at my son, waiting for him to contradict his wife, to tell her that of course we could take it slow, that my comfort mattered, but he just nodded in agreement. "Jennifer's right, Mom. This only works if you actually let me help. Otherwise, we're just wasting everyone's time." I let my shoulders slump in defeat. "Okay, you're right. I'm sorry. I'm just nervous about change. But you know best." I paused, then added carefully, "I actually just opened a new checking account last week to try to organize my finances better. Maybe you could start with that one. I can give you the login information, and you can see how I've been managing things." It was fascinating to watch Bryce's face. He tried to hide his eagerness, but it leaked through in the quick way he nodded, the way he leaned forward slightly. Sure, Mom. That sounds like a good start. Why don't you write down the information for me? Oh, I already did, I said, standing up and walking to the counter. I picked up the piece of paper with the fake account information, like it was something I'd just remembered. I wrote it down yesterday so I wouldn't forget. Here. Bryce took the paper and looked at it, then carefully folded it and put it in his wallet. Great. I'll take a look at this tonight, see how things are set up. And then maybe this weekend we can sit down and talk about adding the other accounts. They left shortly after, and I sat at my kitchen table feeling something cold settle in my stomach, because I had given him a test, and he had failed it in the most obvious way possible. A son who wanted to help would have asked questions about the account, would have suggested we look at it together, would have treated it like something we were doing in partnership. But Bryce had taken that paper and put it away like he was pocketing something valuable, something he wanted to access privately without my involvement. The first alert came at 11:30 that night. A login to the account from an IP address Richard had helped me trace to Bryce's home. Just logging in to look wasn't illegal, but it told me he couldn't even wait one day, couldn't even pretend to be patient. He had gone home and immediately accessed an account I had supposedly given him permission to manage. The second alert came 15 minutes later, a transfer out of the account. $5,000 moved to an external account I didn't recognize. My phone buzzed with the notification, and I stared at the screen in my dark bedroom, feeling the last remnants of maternal hope crumble into dust. He was stealing from me. Not hypothetically, not maybe. Actually stealing, taking money. He thought I could barely afford to lose money. I had supposedly scraped together from my miserable secretary salary. $5,000 that would have been catastrophic for the person he thought I was. I called Richard at 7 the next morning. He took $5,000. There was a pause. Already, Eleanor, I'm sorry. I know this isn't what you wanted to find out. What do I do now? Now we document everything. We watch and wait and gather evidence, because if he's willing to steal $5,000 in the first 12 hours, this is going to get much worse. Richard was right. Over the next week, Bryce accessed the account 6 more times. He took money in smaller amounts, $1,000, here, $1,500 there, like he thought I wouldn't notice if he was careful, like I was too stupid or too senile to check my own bank balance. The total climbed to $12,000, $12,000 stolen in 1 week. I didn't confront him. I acted like nothing was wrong. When he called to check in, I told him everything was fine. I felt so much better knowing he was handling things. I could hear the satisfaction in his voice, the pleasure of someone who thinks they're getting away with something clever. But I also started looking deeper. I called my actual bank, the one where I kept my real accounts that Bryce knew nothing about, and asked them to run a complete audit. I want to see every transaction for the last 5 years, everything, and I want to know if there have been any attempts to access my accounts or open new accounts in my name. The bank manager, a woman named Patricia, who had handled my accounts for years, called me back 3 days later. Her voice was tight and concerned. "Eleanor, you need to come in. There are some things you need to see." I sat in her office that afternoon and watched as she pulled up screen after screen of transactions. "Someone opened a credit card in your name 18 months ago," she said. "It has a balance of $8,000, all purchases made at home improvement stores and furniture retailers." My chest felt tight. I never opened a credit card. "I know, this is fraud, and there's more." She clicked to another screen. "There was an attempt to open a home equity line of credit on a property listed in your name 6 months ago. It was denied because the property address didn't match our records for you, but the application was made with your social security number and date of birth." "What property?" Patricia showed me the address. It was Bryce's house, the house he supposedly bought with his savings. Apparently at some point he had tried to put it in my name, probably so he could borrow against it. "There's also this," Patricia continued, pulling up another document. "A loan application from 2 years ago, personal loan for $15,000. It was approved and the money was dispersed, but you've never made a payment. It's currently in default and has been sent to collections." I stared at the screen at the signature that was supposed to be mine, but wasn't quite right. At the date 2 years ago, right around the time Bryce bought his house. He forged my signature. It appears so. Eleanor, this is serious. This isn't just family drama. This is identity theft and fraud. You need to report this. I gathered all the documents Patricia printed for me and went straight back to Richard's office. I dumped the stack of papers on his desk and said, "It's worse than we thought." Richard went through everything methodically, making notes, his expression growing darker with each page. When he finished, he looked up at me with something like anger in his eyes. "Your son has committed multiple felonies. Identity theft, fraud, forgery. We're talking about potential prison time here. What do I do?" "First, we file a police report. Then we notify the credit bureaus and freeze your credit. We dispute every fraudulent account and charge. And we prepare for the possibility that Bryce might try something even more extreme when he realizes you know what he's been doing." That last part made my blood run cold. "What do you mean more extreme?" Richard looked at me seriously. "Eleanor, your son has shown he's willing to commit serious crimes to get your money. Men like that, when they're cornered, sometimes escalate. I want you to be careful. Change your locks. Be aware of your surroundings. If he has a key to your apartment, get the locks changed immediately." I went home that evening and called a locksmith. By 10 o'clock that night, my apartment had new locks. The key I had given Bryce years ago no longer worked. I also installed a small security camera by my front door, one of those inexpensive ones that connects to your phone. If Bryce tried to enter my apartment, I would know. Friday came, and like clockwork, Bryce and Jennifer showed up at 6 o'clock expecting their free dinner. I watched through my peephole as Bryce tried his key and found it didn't work. I heard him try it several times, confused, before he finally knocked on the door. I opened it but didn't invite them in. I stood in the doorway blocking the entrance. "Hi, Bryce. Hi, Jennifer." Bryce looked annoyed. "Mom, my key doesn't work. Did you change the locks?" "I did." "Why would you do that?" I looked at him calmly. "Because you stole from me. Because you've been stealing from me for years, and you're not welcome in my home anymore." His face went completely white. Jennifer grabbed his arm, her eyes wide. "What are you talking about?" Bryce stammered. "I haven't stolen anything." "You took $12,000 from the account I gave you access to. You opened a credit card in my name. You took out a loan in my name. You've been committing fraud for years, and I have proof of all of it." "Mom, you're confused. You're not remembering things right. We need to get you to a doctor." There it was, the gaslighting, the attempt to make me doubt my own reality. I had expected it, but hearing it still made me angry. "I'm not confused, Bryce. I have bank statements. I have transaction records. I have copies of applications with forged signatures. I've already been to the police. This isn't a misunderstanding. This is theft." Jennifer found her voice then. "You went to the police against your own son. What kind of mother does that?" "The kind who refuses to be a victim," I said. "The kind who worked hard for everything she has and won't let anyone, not even her own child, steal it from her." Bryce's expression shifted from panic to anger. "You think you're so smart. You think you know what you're doing. Mom, you have no idea what you've just started. I'll fight this. I'll tell everyone you're mentally incompetent. I'll have you declared unfit. I'll make sure everyone knows you're a crazy old woman who doesn't know what she's doing." "You can try," I said. "But I have something you don't have. I have the truth, and I have evidence. Good luck convincing anyone I'm incompetent when I can produce years of financial records and professional evaluations." "What are you talking about?" I smiled, then a cold smile I didn't know I was capable of. "Bryce, you don't actually know anything about me. You've never asked about my real life. You've never cared about anything beyond what you could get from me. So let me tell you something you don't know. I'm not a secretary. I'm a senior financial analyst at Sterling Financial Group. I have been for 35 years. I manage portfolios worth hundreds of millions of dollars. I make over $300,000 a year. I have a net worth of over $4 million. Every story I told you about struggling, about working 2 jobs, about barely making ends meet, was a lie, a test. And you failed it spectacularly." I watched the information process across his face. Shocked disbelief, then a dawning horror as he realized what it meant. If I was wealthy, if I was successful, then everything he'd been doing was even more indefensible. He hadn't been taking money from a struggling mother who wouldn't notice. He'd been attempting to steal from someone who knew exactly what she was doing and had the resources to fight back. "You're lying," he said weakly. "I'm not. Call Sterling Financial on Monday. Ask for Eleanor Johnson's office. You'll get my assistant. Her name is Danielle. She's worked for me for 8 years." Jennifer was staring at me like she'd never seen me before. Why would you lie about something like that? To see what kind of man I raised. To see if my son would help me when he thought I needed it, or if he would use me when he thought he could get away with it. I have my answer now. Bryce grabbed Jennifer's arm and started backing away from my door. "This isn't over," he said. "You'll regret this." "I already regret plenty," I told him, "but stopping you isn't one of them." I closed the door and locked it all 3 locks and stood there listening to them argue in the hallway. I heard Jennifer's sharp voice saying, "You told me she was poor. You told me she needed our help." I heard Bryce's defensive response, though I couldn't make out the words. Then I heard their footsteps retreating, fading away. I walked to my kitchen and poured myself a glass of wine from a bottle I'd been saving. I sat at my table in the dim light and felt the weight of everything settle on my shoulders. I had just blown up my relationship with my only child. I had just revealed a lie I'd maintained for decades. I had just opened a door I could never close again. But I also felt something else. I felt relief. Profound, bone-deep relief. Because I didn't have to pretend anymore. I didn't have to be the struggling mother playing small, making myself weak and vulnerable to test his character. The test was over. The results were in. And now I could protect myself without guilt. My phone rang at 7 the next morning. It was Margaret from work. "Eleanor, there's someone here asking about you. A man claiming to be your son. Security stopped him at the front desk, but he's demanding to see you. Don't let him up. Tell security he's not authorized." "Already done. But Eleanor, he seems pretty agitated. Maybe you should come in and deal with this." I got dressed and drove to my office, parking in my assigned spot in the executive garage. I took the private elevator up to the 15th floor and walked through doors that said Sterling Financial Group in gold lettering. My assistant Danielle looked up from her desk with worried eyes. "He's still downstairs," she said. "Security called 10 minutes ago. He's refusing to leave until he talks to you. Tell them to call the police if he won't leave voluntarily. He's not my responsibility anymore." I walked into my corner office with its floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city and closed the door. I could see my whole life laid out in that room. The degrees on the wall, the awards and commendations, the photos with clients and colleagues, the evidence of a successful career I'd built through intelligence and hard work. A career my son never knew existed because he'd never bothered to really know me at all. My phone buzzed with a text from Bryce. "We need to talk. You can't just cut me off like this. I'm your son." I typed back, "You were my son. Now you're just someone who committed crimes against me. My lawyer will be in touch." 3 dots appeared showing he was typing, then disappeared, then appeared again. Finally, a message came through. "I'll tell everyone what kind of person you really are. A liar, a manipulator, someone who plays sick games with her own family. Tell whoever you want." I typed back, "The truth is on my side." I didn't respond to that last message. There was nothing left to say. I turned off my phone and spent the rest of Saturday morning reviewing financial reports, losing myself in numbers and projections in the safe, predictable world of market analysis where everything made sense according to clear rules and logic. Security called at noon to tell me Bryce had finally left, but not before making a scene in the lobby, shouting about how his mother was mentally ill and someone needed to do something about it. They had it all on video, which they offered to send me copies of for documentation purposes. I told them, yes, send everything. Evidence mattered now. Everything had to be documented. Richard called me that afternoon. "Eleanor, we need to talk about next steps. The police report has been filed. The banks are investigating the fraudulent accounts. But I want you to think carefully about whether you want to press criminal charges. Because once we go down that road, there's no coming back from it." "What happens if I don't press charges?" "Then this becomes a civil matter. We can sue for the return of stolen funds plus damages. It stays out of the criminal justice system. Bryce might end up owing you money, but he won't go to jail. And if I do press charges, then the district attorney's office gets involved. If they decide to prosecute, and with this evidence, they probably will, Bryce could face serious prison time. Multiple counts of identity theft, fraud, forgery. We're talking years, not months. I sat with that information, feeling the weight of it. I could send my own son to prison. My son, who I had carried for 9 months, who I had nursed and raised and loved with every fiber of my being. But then I thought about what he had done, not just the theft, but the calculation behind it, the sustained effort over years to steal from someone he thought was vulnerable. And I thought about other people's mothers, other elderly people he might target in the future if he faced no real consequences now. I want to press charges, I said, not because I want revenge, but because he needs to face real consequences, because if he doesn't, he'll just do this to someone else. Richard was quiet for a moment. Okay, I'll contact the district attorney's office on Monday. Eleanor, this is going to get ugly. Bryce will fight back. He'll say terrible things about you. Are you prepared for that? I don't think I have a choice. You always have a choice, but I think you're making the right one. That Sunday, I did something I hadn't done in months. I called Mrs. Bertha Washington, my old neighbor from the apartment building where I had raised Bryce, where I had supposedly struggled so hard. She was 78 now and still lived in the same apartment she'd lived in for 40 years. Eleanor, oh my goodness, I haven't heard from you in so long. How are you, dear? I told her everything, the whole story from beginning to end. When I finished, there was a long silence on the other end of the line. Then Mrs. Bertha said in her quiet, measured way, I knew something wasn't right with that boy. Even when he was young, there was something cold about him, like he could turn off his feelings when it suited him. You never said anything. What was I going to say? You loved him so much. You couldn't see it. Mothers often can't see what their children really are. They see what they want them to be instead. I see it now. I know you do, honey, and I'm sorry. I'm sorry you had to find out this way, but I'm glad you're protecting yourself. That takes real strength. We talked for another hour, and it felt like coming home to something I'd forgotten I'd lost. Mrs. Bertha had been like a second mother to me during those hard years, and I had drifted away from her as my career took off and my life became more complicated. I promised to visit her soon, and I meant it. Monday morning came too fast. I went to work early before dawn and found an email from Danielle marked urgent. Mrs. Johnson, there are several posts about you on social media. I think you should see them before you talk to anyone today. My stomach dropped. I opened the links she had sent and saw that Bryce had made good on his threat. He had written a long, detailed post on every social media platform he had, telling his version of events. In his story, I was a disturbed, possibly senile mother who had suddenly turned on him without reason. He said I had accused him of terrible things, without evidence that I was suffering from paranoid delusions, that he was heartbroken and didn't know what to do. He asked for prayers and support during this difficult time. The comments were mostly sympathetic. People who didn't know me, who only knew Bryce's carefully curated online presence, believed him completely. They said things like, I'm so sorry you're going through this, and elder mental illness is so hard on families, and maybe it's time to consider memory care for her. I felt sick reading it, but I also felt something else. I felt angry, coldly, clearly angry, because Bryce was betting that I would be too ashamed to defend myself publicly, too private to air our family's dirty laundry for the world to see. He was counting on my silence to let his lies stand unchallenged. He was wrong about that, too. I called Richard. He's posting about me on social media, saying I'm mentally ill. Can we do anything about that? We can document it as harassment. And Eleanor, I think it might be time to tell your side of the story. Not all of it, not the private details, but enough to establish that you're not the person he's claiming you are. I thought about it for all of 10 seconds. Okay, help me write something. By noon that day, I had posted my own statement. It was brief, professional, and devastating in its simplicity. Recent posts about me contained false and defamatory statements. I am not suffering from any mental illness or cognitive impairment. I am a senior financial analyst at Sterling Financial Group, where I have worked successfully for 35 years. I have filed police reports regarding identity theft and financial fraud committed against me. These are not delusions. These are documented crimes with substantial evidence. I will not be commenting further, as this is now a legal matter. I included a photo of myself at my desk in my office, with my name placard clearly visible. I included my LinkedIn profile showing my entire professional history. I included a statement from my doctor confirming I had no cognitive impairment. And then I posted it everywhere Bryce had posted his lies. The response was immediate and dramatic. People who had been sympathizing with Bryce suddenly had questions. Wait, she's a financial analyst. She doesn't look mentally ill to me. Why would he say these things if they're not true? Some people apologized for assuming Bryce's version was accurate. Others defended him, saying I must be lying or exaggerating. But the seed of doubt had been planted. Bryce called me within an hour of my post going live. I didn't answer. He called again and again. On the fifth call, I answered and put him on speaker so I could record it, which was legal in my state. What the hell, Mom? You're making me look like a liar. You are a liar, Bryce. I was trying to protect you. I was trying to keep this private, and you just exposed everything to the whole world. You exposed me first. You told lies about my mental health to cover up your crimes. I just told the truth. The truth. The truth is, you're a manipulative person who's been lying to me my entire life. You pretended to be poor. You let me think you were struggling. I let you show me who you really were, and you showed me Bryce, very clearly. There was a pause, then his voice came back harder, meaner. You're going to regret this. I'm going to make sure everyone knows what kind of person you are. A mother who would send her own son to jail. A son who would steal from his own mother. I countered. You made your choices. Now live with them. I hung up before he could respond and immediately sent the recording to Richard. Add it to the file, I texted him. The next few days were a blur of police interviews, meetings with the district attorney, and conversations with bank fraud investigators. The case was building piece by piece, transaction by transaction. The evidence was overwhelming. Forged signatures that didn't match mine. IP addresses showing account access from Bryce's home. Transfer records showing money moving from my accounts to his. Credit card purchases at stores near his house, at times when I was provably somewhere else. The district attorney, a sharp woman named Karen Mitchell, laid it all out for me in her office. Mrs. Johnson, this is one of the clearest cases of family financial fraud I've seen. Your son's mistake was that he got greedy. If he'd taken smaller amounts over longer periods, it might have been harder to prove. But $12,000 in 1 week, that shows intent. That shows he knew exactly what he was doing. What happens now? Now we formally charge him. He'll be arrested, arraigned, and given a chance to post bail. His lawyer will probably try to negotiate a plea deal. Most cases like this don't go to trial. But if he refuses to plead, and this does go to trial, you'll have to testify. Are you prepared for that? I thought about sitting in a courtroom looking at Bryce across that formal space and telling a judge and jury what he had done to me. Yes, I'm prepared. Good. Because he's going to try every trick in the book to avoid consequences. He's going to claim you gave him permission. He's going to say you're confused about the timeline. He's going to make you out to be the villain. You need to be ready for that. I am ready. Karen nodded approvingly. I believe you. Most victims in family fraud cases drop the charges before we even get to court. They can't handle the emotional pressure, but you strike me as someone who can see this through. She was right. I could see it through, because I had spent too many years being manipulated, being used, making myself small to accommodate Bryce's comfort. I was done with that. I was done shrinking myself. Bryce was arrested on a Thursday morning at his office. I found out from Richard, who had been monitoring the case. They took him in this morning at 10. His employer called asking questions. This is going to impact his job, Eleanor. He might lose it. That's not my problem. He should have thought about consequences before he committed fraud. I know. I'm just preparing you for the next wave of attacks. He's going to blame you for everything that happens to him now. Every negative consequence will be your fault in his mind. Richard was right about that too. Jennifer called me that afternoon, her voice shrill with fury. Are you happy now? He's been arrested at work. Everyone knows his reputation is destroyed. And for what? Some money is. Money worth destroying your own son. He destroyed himself, I said calmly. I didn't forge documents. I didn't steal. I didn't commit fraud. He did all of that on his own. He was trying to help you. By stealing from me, that's an interesting definition of help. You're a vindictive, bitter old woman who can't stand to see her son successful. That's what this is really about. You're jealous. I almost laughed at the absurdity of it. Jennifer, I make more in a year than both of you combined. I have more money than you'll probably earn in your entire life. What exactly would I be jealous of? She didn't have an answer for that. She just made a sound of disgust and hung up. But the calls kept coming. From Jennifer, from people who were apparently Bryce's friends, even from some distant relatives I barely knew. All of them calling to tell me I was wrong, I was cruel, I was destroying my family over nothing. I stopped answering calls from numbers I didn't recognize. I let them all go to voicemail, and every voicemail that contained threats or harassment got forwarded to Richard, who added them to the growing file of evidence showing Bryce's character. Mrs. Bertha called me one evening. Eleanor, there was a man here today asking questions about you, asking the neighbors about your mental state, whether you seemed confused, whether you had memory problems. I told him you were sharp as a tack and always had been, but I thought you should know. What did he look like? 30-something, nice suit, carrying a briefcase, professional looking. A private investigator. Bryce had hired someone to try to build a case that I was incompetent. I called Richard immediately. He's investigating me, trying to prove I'm mentally unfit. Let him. Your medical records are clean. Your work performance is exemplary. He's not going to find what he's looking for. In fact, this might help us. It shows he's trying to discredit you, rather than defend against the actual charges. The arraignment was set for 2 weeks after Bryce's arrest. Richard advised me not to attend. It's just procedural. He'll plead not guilty, bail will be set, and we'll move forward to the next phase. Your presence there will just create drama. But I wanted to go. I needed to see Bryce face those charges in person. I needed to see him stand before a judge and answer for what he had done. So I went sitting in the back of the courtroom wearing my professional clothes, my armor of respectability. Bryce was led in wearing a suit, looking tired and angry. His eyes scanned the courtroom and landed on me. For a moment, our eyes met. I saw shock there and something else. Hurt, maybe, or betrayal. As if I were the one who had betrayed him rather than the other way around. The charges were read: identity theft, fraud, forgery, financial exploitation of a vulnerable adult. That last one made me wince. I wasn't vulnerable. I had never been vulnerable. But legally, anyone over 60 counted as vulnerable in cases like this, which meant the penalties were harsher. Bryce's lawyer, an expensive-looking man in an even more expensive suit, entered a plea of not guilty. The judge set bail at $50,000. Bryce's face went white. I watched as Jennifer, sitting in the front row, put her face in her hands. They probably didn't have $50,000 in liquid cash available. The irony wasn't lost on me. If Bryce had just lived within his means, if he hadn't spent all that stolen money on renovations and furniture and whatever else he'd wasted it on, he'd have the bail money. The judge set a preliminary hearing date for 6 weeks out and dismissed the court. I stood up to leave, and Jennifer saw me. She stood up too, her face twisted with rage, and started walking toward me. The bailiff intercepted her quickly. "You did this!" Jennifer shouted across the courtroom. "You put him in this position. What kind of mother are you?" I looked at her calmly. The kind who refuses to be stolen from, even by her own son. "We're going to fight this. We're going to prove you're lying. Good luck with that." I turned and walked out of the courtroom, my head high, my steps steady. In the hallway outside, a reporter approached me. Apparently, the case had attracted some media attention. Rich woman presses charges against her own son. It made for dramatic headlines. "Mrs. Johnson, can I ask you a few questions?" Richard materialized beside me. "My client has no comment at this time." We walked quickly to the elevator, but I could hear the reporter calling after us. "Mrs. Johnson, do you regret filing charges, Mrs. Johnson? What would you say to other families in similar situations?" In the parking garage, Richard turned to me. "This is going to get bigger. The media loves stories like this. Family drama, wealth betrayal. It has everything. Are you okay with that?" "I don't have a choice, do I?" You could drop the charges. Make this go away. I looked at him steadily. No, I couldn't. Because then he wins. Then he gets away with it. And the next time he needs money, he'll just find another victim. That's what I thought you'd say. Okay, let's prepare for the media circus. The story hit the local news that night. Successful financial analyst accuses son of identity theft. They didn't name me, but anyone who knew us would figure it out quickly. The next morning, I had 15 new friend requests on social media from people I'd never met, all wanting to get closer to the drama. I declined them all and set my accounts to private. My phone rang at 7 in the morning. It was Margaret from work. Eleanor, there are reporters outside the building. They're asking employees about you. What do you want us to do? Tell security not to let them pass the lobby, and tell everyone not to comment. Refer all questions to Richard Morrison's office. Already done, but Eleanor, this is becoming a distraction. Some of the partners are concerned. My stomach sank. Are they asking me to take leave? No. Actually, they're supporting you. David Chen called an emergency partner meeting this morning. He said what happened to you is unconscionable, and the firm stands behind you completely. But he wanted me to let you know you can work from home if you prefer, until the media attention dies down. I felt tears prick my eyes. After so much hostility and anger, this unexpected support felt like a lifeline. Tell David thank you, but I'm coming in. I'm not hiding. I walked into my office that morning with my head high, ignoring the cameras outside, refusing to answer questions shouted at me from the sidewalk. In the elevator, a colleague I barely knew touched my arm gently and said, "I'm sorry you're going through this. For what it's worth, I think you're incredibly brave." At my desk, I found a card signed by everyone in my department. "We support you," it said simply. Margaret had organized it. I put it on my desk where I could see it, a reminder that I wasn't alone in this. Bryce made bail 2 days later. I knew because he immediately started posting on social media again. But this time his posts were different, more calculated, more designed to play the victim. He posted a photo of himself looking exhausted and broken with a caption about how false accusations can destroy innocent lives. He posted about the legal bills he was facing, the job he might lose, the reputation he'd built that was now in ruins. He posted about betrayal by the one person who should have always been in his corner. The comments were split. Some people still supported him. Others were starting to see through the performance. "If you're innocent, why is there so much evidence?" one person wrote. "Financial records don't lie," wrote another. But plenty of people still believed him, still thought I was a vengeful mother making things up. I wanted to respond. I wanted to post all the evidence, publicly show everyone exactly what he'd done. But Richard stopped me. "Don't engage. Let the legal process play out. The truth will come out in court, and then it will be official, undeniable. Right now, anything you post can be used against you as evidence you're trying to taint the jury pool." So I stayed silent publicly. But privately, I was gathering more evidence. I had hired a forensic accountant to go through every transaction, every account, building an ironclad timeline of exactly what Bryce had stolen and when. The numbers were staggering when laid out completely. Over 5 years, Bryce had taken nearly $70,000 from me through various fraudulent means. $70,000 he had no intention of ever paying back. The preliminary hearing arrived faster than I expected. This was where the judge would decide if there was enough evidence to proceed to trial. Richard assured me it was almost a formality. With the evidence we have, there's no way the judge dismisses this. But Bryce's lawyer might use this opportunity to try to negotiate a plea. We met in Richard's office the morning of the hearing. Karen Mitchell, the district attorney, was there too. "I spoke with Bryce's attorney yesterday," she said. "He's fishing for a deal, wants us to drop the felony charges in exchange for a guilty plea to misdemeanor fraud." "No," I said immediately. "What he did wasn't a misdemeanor. It was calculated, sustained, serious theft." Karen nodded. "That's what I told him, but I wanted to check with you first. Some victims want this over as quickly as possible. I want justice, real justice. Then we go to the hearing and we push for trial." The courtroom was more crowded this time. Word had spread and there were more reporters, more spectators, people drawn to the drama of a mother prosecuting her son. I sat behind the prosecutor's table in the row reserved for victims. Bryce sat at the defense table, carefully not looking at me. The judge, a stern-looking woman in her 60s, named Judge Patricia Holloway, called the hearing to order. Karen presented the evidence methodically. Bank records, forged signatures, IP logs, security footage showing Bryce at a bank branch where he'd used my information to access an account. Expert testimony from a handwriting analyst showing the signatures on various documents didn't match my actual signature. It took 2 hours to go through everything. By the end, Judge Holloway was frowning deeply. Bryce's lawyer tried to argue the evidence was circumstantial, that I had given Bryce permission to manage my finances, that any discrepancies were simple mistakes, not crimes. But his arguments sounded weak even to my untrained ears. Judge Holloway looked directly at Bryce. "Mr. Johnson, I've reviewed the evidence presented today. I'm finding probable cause to believe you committed the crimes you're charged with. This case will proceed to trial." Bryce's face crumpled at the judge's words. I watched him put his head in his hands, watched Jennifer reach over to squeeze his shoulder, watched his expensive lawyer lean in to whisper something I couldn't hear. Judge Holloway set the trial date for 3 months out and banged her gavel. It was done. We were going to trial. Outside the courtroom, reporters swarmed. Cameras flashed. Microphones were shoved in my face. Richard guided me through them with a firm hand on my elbow, repeating, "No comment," like a mantra. But one reporter's question cut through the noise loud and clear. "Mrs. Johnson, do you hate your son?" I stopped walking. Richard tried to pull me forward, but I turned to face the cameras. "I don't hate my son. I hate what he did. I hate that he chose money over our relationship. I hate that he thought so little of me that he believed he could steal from me without consequences. But hate him, no. I'm just done being his victim." The clip went viral within hours. It played on every local news station. It was shared thousands of times on social media. Suddenly, public opinion began to shift. People who had been defending Bryce started asking harder questions. If his mother was really mentally ill, why did she speak so clearly? If she was really confused, why did the evidence support her claims so strongly? Bryce responded with another post more desperate this time. He wrote about how I had manipulated him his entire life, how I had pretended to be poor to make him feel guilty, how I had tested him like some kind of psychological experiment. "What kind of mother lies to her own child for decades?" he wrote. "What kind of person plays games with their family just to see how they'll react? She's not the victim here. She created this entire situation." The comments on that post were more divided than before. Some people agreed with him. "That's messed up, testing your own kid like that." Others pushed back. "But that doesn't make it okay to steal from her." The debate raged online, while I tried to focus on work on my life, on anything other than the public dissection of my family's dysfunction. Margaret brought me coffee one afternoon and sat across from my desk. "How are you holding up?" "I don't know anymore. Some days I'm fine. Some days I wonder if I'm doing the right thing, and some days I'm just so angry I can barely see straight." "That's all normal, Eleanor. What you're going through, it's a kind of grief. You're mourning the relationship you thought you had with your son." "I'm mourning the son I thought I had. Turns out he never existed." Margaret nodded slowly. "Maybe not. Or maybe he did exist once and changed. People do change, not always for the better." That night I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling and thinking about Bryce as a child, the little boy who used to climb into my bed during thunderstorms, the teenager who cried on my shoulder when his first girlfriend broke his heart, the young man who hugged me so tight at his college graduation and whispered, "Thank you, Mom, for everything." Where had that person gone, or had I just been seeing what I wanted to see all along? My phone buzzed at 2 a.m, a text from a number I didn't recognize. "You're going to lose everything. Your reputation, your job, your peace of mind. Drop the charges while you still can." I took a screenshot and forwarded it to Richard. Another piece of evidence for the harassment file. The texts kept coming over the following weeks, sometimes from Bryce's number, sometimes from Jennifer's, sometimes from numbers I didn't know. They ranged from pleading to threatening. "Mom, please, you're ruining my life. We can work this out if you just drop the charges. You're going to regret this. I'll make sure everyone knows what you really are." I saved every single one and sent them all to Richard. Karen Mitchell called me into her office 6 weeks before the trial. Bryce's lawyer reached out again. They want to make a deal. What kind of deal? He pleads guilty to 1 count of fraud, pays full restitution plus $20,000 in damages, gets 5 years probation and a permanent criminal record. No jail time. I sat with that information. Part of me wanted to say no, wanted to push for the maximum penalty, wanted him to face every consequence possible. But another part of me, a quieter part, was exhausted. "What do you think?" "I think it's a reasonable offer. Full restitution means you get your money back. The criminal record means he'll have trouble doing this to anyone else. And frankly, Eleanor trials are brutal, especially family trials. He'll put you on the stand and his lawyer will try to tear you apart. They'll bring up every mistake you ever made as a mother, every time you were too strict or not strict enough, every choice they can spin as proof you deserved what happened to you. I can handle that. I know you can. But the question is, should you have to? You've already been through hell. This deal gets you justice without putting you through more trauma." I thought about sitting on a witness stand while Bryce's lawyer asked me why I had lied about being poor, why I had tested my son. What kind of mother does that? I thought about having my parenting dissected in public, every decision I'd ever made, questioned and judged. And I thought about Bryce, about the boy he used to be, about the fact that no matter what he'd done, he was still my son, and some part of me would always love the child he'd been, even if I couldn't stand the man he'd become. "I want 2 things added to the deal," I said. "First, he has to issue a public apology admitting what he did was wrong. No excuses, no blame shifting. A real apology. Second, he has to attend financial counseling for a year. I want documented proof he's learning to manage money properly." Karen wrote that down. "I'll present it to his lawyer. But Eleanor, I have to tell you, the apology might be the hardest part for him. People like Bryce, they don't apologize. They don't admit fault. He might reject the deal over that. Then we go to trial. But I'm not letting him get away with a plea deal while still claiming he did nothing wrong." 2 days later, Karen called back. He agreed to all of it. He must really not want to go to trial. "When does he plead?" "Next week. And Eleanor, I need you to be prepared for how this is going to feel. You won. You got justice. But it might not feel like winning." She was right. The plea hearing was scheduled for a Tuesday morning. I sat in the same courtroom where this had all started, watching Bryce stand before Judge Holloway. He looked smaller, somehow diminished. The confident, entitled man who had sat in my kitchen demanding control of my money was gone, replaced by someone who looked tired and beaten down. Judge Holloway reviewed the plea agreement carefully. "Mr. Johnson, do you understand that by accepting this plea, you are admitting guilt to fraud, that you will have a permanent criminal record?" "Yes, Your Honor." Bryce's voice was quiet, almost inaudible. "And you understand the terms full restitution of $70,000 plus $20,000 in damages to be paid within 2 years, 5 years probation, financial counseling, public apology?" "Yes, Your Honor." "Do you have anything to say before I accept this plea?" Bryce turned slightly, looking at me for the first time since the hearing began. Our eyes met across the courtroom. "I'm sorry," he said, and I couldn't tell if he meant it or if it was just another performance. "I made terrible choices. I hurt the person who loved me most. I deserve everything that's happening to me." Judge Holloway accepted the plea and set a payment schedule. Bryce would have to pay $3,000 a month for 2 years to cover the restitution and damages. It would be tight for him, maybe even painful, but it was doable. And more importantly, it was accountability. After the hearing, I stood in the courthouse hallway, feeling strangely empty. I had won. Bryce had admitted guilt. He was paying me back. Justice had been served. But Karen had been right. It didn't feel like winning. It felt like losing everything that mattered. Richard found me standing there. "You okay?" "No, but I will be. The public apology is supposed to be posted within 48 hours. I'll monitor to make sure he complies." I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. We walked out of the courthouse together, and for once there were no reporters waiting. The story had lost its drama once the plea was accepted. Family reconciles through legal system. It didn't have the same ring as family destroys itself in court. That night I sat alone in my apartment and let myself cry for the first time since this all began. Not sad tears or angry tears, but tears of release. Tears for the son I'd lost, for the relationship that could never be repaired, for all the years I'd wasted, hoping he would become someone he wasn't capable of being. Bryce posted his apology the next day. It was brief and clearly written by his lawyer, but the words were there in black and white. "I engaged in fraudulent activity against my mother, Eleanor Johnson. I stole money from her through various illegal means over a period of several years. There is no excuse for what I did. I betrayed her trust and violated the law. I take full responsibility for my actions, and I am deeply sorry for the pain I caused." The comments were surprisingly supportive, but not of Bryce. People praised me for holding him accountable. "This is what real strength looks like," one person wrote. "She loved him enough to let him face consequences," wrote another. I didn't read too many of them. Public opinion didn't matter anymore. The only opinion that mattered was my own, and I knew I had done what needed to be done. The first restitution payment arrived in my account 2 weeks later, $3,000 exactly as specified in the agreement. I stared at the transaction on my phone, feeling nothing. The money didn't fix anything. It didn't undo the betrayal or heal the wound. It was just money. I called Mrs. Bertha that evening. "It's over. He pleaded guilty. He's paying me back." "How do you feel, honey?" "Empty, relieved, sad. I don't know, all of it at once." "That's normal. Endings are complicated even when they're necessary. What are you going to do now?" It was a good question. What was I going to do now? For months, my entire life had revolved around this case, this fight, this need for justice. Now that I had it, I didn't know what came next. "I think I need to start over," I said slowly. "Not completely, but I need to build a life that isn't defined by what happened with Bryce. I need to figure out who I am when I'm not being his mother or his victim." That sounds like a good plan. Over the next few weeks, I started making changes. Small ones at first. I redecorated my apartment, getting rid of anything that reminded me of the life I used to have. I bought new furniture, new artwork, new dishes. I made the space completely mine in a way it had never been before. I also started therapy. I had resisted it for a long time, thinking I could handle everything on my own, but I finally admitted I needed help processing what had happened. My therapist, Dr. Sarah Chen, was patient and insightful. She helped me understand that what I'd experienced wasn't just theft. It was a profound violation of trust that had shaken my ability to trust my own judgment. "You spent decades building your life around a false premise," she told me in one session. "You believed your son loved you in a way he was never capable of loving. That's not your fault. You can't make someone into something they're not, no matter how much you want to." "But I should have seen it sooner. The signs were all there." Maybe, but we don't usually look for evidence that the people we love are betraying us. We trust until we can't anymore. That's not weakness, Eleanor. That's being human. Margaret convinced me to start taking the vacation days I'd accumulated over the years. I had weeks of unused time, and she insisted I take at least some of it. "You've been running on adrenaline for months. You need to rest." So I took 2 weeks off and did something I'd never done before. I went on a trip by myself. Not a work trip or a family obligation, but a real vacation. I flew to Italy, a place I'd always wanted to see but never had time for. I spent my days walking through ancient streets, eating incredible food, visiting museums and churches, and just being present in a way I hadn't been in years. It was there, sitting in a small cafe in Florence, watching people pass by on the street, that I realized something. I was 62 years old, and I was finally free. Free from the burden of trying to make Bryce into someone he wasn't. Free from the exhausting work of maintaining a relationship that only went one direction. Free to build a life based on what I wanted, not what I thought I owed to someone else. When I got back to the States, I made another decision. I sold my apartment, the one where I'd raised Bryce, where so many memories lived in the walls. It sold quickly for a good price, and I used the money as a down payment on a small house in a neighborhood I'd always loved but never thought I could afford when I was maintaining the fiction of being poor. The house had 2 bedrooms, a little garden, and a view of the park from the kitchen window. It was perfect. More importantly, it was mine, chosen by me, with no ghosts of the past haunting its rooms. I also started reaching out to people I'd lost touch with over the years, colleagues I'd worked with decades ago, friends from college I'd drifted away from, Mrs. Bertha, who became a regular coffee date. I built a social life that wasn't centered around Bryce or waiting for him to visit or trying to maintain a relationship with someone who didn't want one. Work became a source of joy again instead of just a distraction. I took on a new client, a young woman starting her first business who reminded me of myself at that age. I mentored her, helped her understand financial planning and investment strategy. She sent me a thank you note after our 3rd meeting. "You've taught me more about money in 3 sessions than I learned in 4 years of business school. Thank you for believing in me." That note went on my refrigerator right next to the card my coworkers had given me during the trial. Reminders that I was more than what had happened with Bryce, that I had value beyond being a mother, that I could help people and make a difference without sacrificing myself in the process. The monthly payments kept arriving from Bryce regular as clockwork. $3,000 on the 1st of every month. I transferred each payment directly into a separate account money I earmarked for charity. I donated it to organizations that helped elderly people avoid financial fraud, that educated families about financial literacy, that provided legal aid to victims of family exploitation. If Bryce's theft was going to mean something, I wanted it to mean something good. I wanted other people to be protected in ways I hadn't been. I wanted other elderly people to know they had resources and rights and didn't have to stay silent about abuse. 6 months after the plea hearing, I received a letter in the mail. It was from Bryce, handwritten on plain paper. I almost threw it away without reading it, but curiosity got the better of me. "Mom," it began. "I know I don't have the right to write to you. I know you probably don't want to hear from me. But my counselor suggested I write this letter as part of my therapy, whether I send it or not. So here it is. I've been going to financial counseling like the court ordered, but I've also been seeing a regular therapist, trying to figure out why I did what I did, trying to understand how I became the kind of person who would steal from his own mother. The truth is, I don't have a good answer. My therapist says it's about entitlement, about growing up believing the world owed me something because things were hard for us when I was young. About resentment, I never dealt with properly. Maybe that's true. Maybe it's more complicated. But what I know for sure is that I was wrong. Not just wrong to steal, but wrong about everything. Wrong to treat you like a resource instead of a person. Wrong to take your sacrifices for granted. Wrong to assume you existed to serve my needs. I don't expect you to forgive me. I don't even know if I deserve forgiveness. But I want you to know that I'm trying to be better, trying to understand what I did and why, so I never do it to anyone else. Jennifer and I are in marriage counseling too. She's had to face some hard truths about herself as well, about how she encouraged my behavior, about how she benefited from what I was doing. We might not make it. Honestly, I'm not sure we should, but we're trying. I don't know if you'll ever want to talk to me again. I understand if you don't, but if you ever do, I'm here. And I'm sorry, really truly sorry, not just for getting caught, but for doing it in the first place. Bryce. I read the letter 3 times, looking for manipulation, for hidden agendas, for any sign it was just another performance. But it sounded genuine. It sounded like someone who had finally started to understand the magnitude of what he'd done. I called Dr. Chen and read her the letter. "What do you think? Is this real?" "I can't tell you that, Eleanor. Only you can decide if you believe him. But I can tell you that sometimes people do change. Sometimes consequences actually wake people up. Whether Bryce is one of those people, only time will tell." Do I respond? Do you want to? I thought about it for a long time, days actually. The letter sat on my kitchen counter while I considered what I wanted. Did I want a relationship with Bryce? Did I want to open that door again, knowing it might lead to more hurt? Did I believe people could really change, or was I just hoping because it was easier than accepting the finality of loss? Finally, I wrote back. It was a short letter, much shorter than his. Bryce, I received your letter. I appreciate the apology, and I hope you mean it. I hope your therapy helps you become the person you should have been all along. But I'm not ready for more than this. Maybe someday I will be. Maybe not. For now, I need to focus on my own healing. I need to build a life that doesn't revolve around you or what you did to me. I wish you well. I hope you find peace. But I need space. Please respect that. Mom, I mailed it before I could change my mind, and then I let it go. I let go of the hope that things would magically fix themselves. I let go of the fantasy that we could go back to some version of our relationship that probably never existed in the first place. I let go of Bryce, not with hatred, but with acceptance. Margaret threw me a party for my 63rd birthday. She invited everyone from work plus Mrs. Bertha and some of my new friends from the neighborhood. We gathered in my new house in my garden and celebrated with champagne and cake and laughter. Someone asked me if this past year had been the hardest of my life. I thought about it carefully before answering. It was hard, I said. It was devastating in ways I didn't know were possible, but it also freed me. It forced me to figure out who I am when I'm not defined by being someone's mother, and I like who I found. So was it hard? Yes. But was it worth it? Also yes. The payments kept coming. Month after month, $3,000 appeared in my account, was transferred to my charity fund, and was distributed to organizations doing good work. I sent Bryce a receipt every quarter showing where his money went, a small reminder that his theft was being transformed into something positive. I didn't hear from him again after my letter. No more texts, no calls, no social media posts about me. He had respected my request for space, which was more than I had expected. Maybe he really was changing. Maybe he wasn't. Either way, it was no longer my problem to solve. A year after the plea agreement, I was promoted at work. Senior Vice President of Client Relations. It came with a substantial raise, a larger office, and more responsibility. David Chen called me into his office to tell me personally, "Eleanor, you've been through hell this year, but you never let it affect your work. You never used it as an excuse. You showed up every day and did your job with excellence. That's the kind of person we want leading our team." Thank you, David. That means more than you know. Also, between you and me, the way you handled the situation with your son, it took guts. A lot of people would have just let it go, would have been too embarrassed or too afraid, but you fought for yourself. That's leadership. I hung the new nameplate on my new office door and stood back to look at it. Eleanor Johnson, Senior Vice President. Evidence of a life I'd built through my own effort, my own intelligence, my own strength. A life that had nothing to do with Bryce or motherhood or sacrifice. A life that was entirely, completely mine. That evening, I sat in my garden with a glass of wine and watched the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. My phone buzzed with a text from Mrs. Bertha. "Dinner next week, my treat." I texted back a yes and smiled. This was my life now, this hard-won, carefully constructed, deeply precious life. It wasn't the life I had imagined when Bryce was born 34 years ago. It wasn't the fairy tale ending where families reconcile and love conquers all. But it was real. It was honest. And most importantly, it was mine. The phone call came 18 months after the plea agreement on a Tuesday morning while I was reviewing quarterly reports in my office. An unknown number, which I normally wouldn't answer, but something made me pick up. "Mrs. Johnson, this is Detective Maria Santos with the Fraud Division. I'm calling about your son, Bryce Johnson." My stomach dropped. "What happened? Is he okay?" "He's fine physically, but we've arrested him again. Different victim this time, his mother-in-law." I sat down heavily in my chair, the quarterly reports forgotten. "Jennifer's mother." "Yes, he opened 3 credit cards in her name over the past 6 months, charged about $30,000. She only found out when debt collectors started calling her. She filed a report yesterday, and when we ran his name, your case came up. I'm calling because the DA wants to know if you'd be willing to testify about your experience. It would establish a pattern of behavior." He's still on probation from my case. Yes, which makes this even worse for him. If convicted, he's looking at actual prison time now. The judge won't be lenient twice. I thought about Jennifer's mother, a woman I'd met maybe 5 times at family events. She was in her 70s, recently widowed, living on Social Security and a small pension. $30,000 would devastate her. I'll testify. When do you need me? The preliminary hearing is in 3 weeks. I'll be in touch with details. And Mrs. Johnson, I'm sorry. I know this must be difficult finding out he didn't change. After I hung up, I sat staring at the city skyline through my office window. All those therapy sessions Bryce attended, all those letters about becoming a better person, all that supposed soul-searching and growth. It had been a performance, another manipulation. He hadn't learned anything except maybe how to be more careful about getting caught. I called Dr. Chen during my lunch break. He did it again, to Jennifer's mother this time. There was a long pause. How do you feel? Angry, but also vindicated in a horrible way. I kept wondering if I'd been too hard on him, if I should have given him another chance. Now I know. He can't be trusted. He won't change. Sometimes people show us who they are repeatedly, and we just have to believe them. I'm sorry it turned out this way. That evening, I got another call, this time from Jennifer. Her voice was thick with tears. Eleanor, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. You tried to warn me. You tried to show me what he was, and I didn't believe you. I thought you were vindictive. I thought you were lying. But you weren't. You were protecting yourself. And I should have been protecting my mother. Jennifer, this isn't your fault. Isn't it I enabled him? I defended him. I helped him destroy his relationship with you, and now he's destroyed mine with my mother. She won't even talk to me. She says I brought a criminal into her life. What are you going to do? I'm leaving him. I filed for divorce this morning. I can't, Eleanor. I can't be married to someone like this. Someone who would steal from a 72-year-old widow, my own mother. What kind of person does that? Someone who sees people as resources instead of human beings. Jennifer sobbed on the other end of the line. I'm moving back to my parents' house. Well, my dad's house now. My mom won't be there. She's staying with my sister. She can't even look at me. Give her time. She's hurt and scared right now. But you're her daughter. Eventually she'll remember that. I hope so. Eleanor, can I ask you something? What? How did you do it? How did you walk away from him? How did you stop loving him enough to protect yourself? I thought carefully about my answer. I didn't stop loving him. I stopped letting that love destroy me. Those are 2 different things. You can love someone and still refuse to let them hurt you. After Jennifer hung up, I poured myself a glass of wine and stood in my kitchen processing this new information. Bryce was going to prison. Real prison this time. The judge wouldn't show mercy to someone who committed the same crime while still on probation for the first one. He'd be lucky to get 5 years, more likely 7 or 10. Part of me felt satisfied. Justice was being served. Another part felt sad for the boy he'd been, the potential he'd wasted. And a very small part, a part I didn't want to acknowledge, felt guilty. Wondered if I'd failed him somehow as a mother, if there was something I could have done differently that would have resulted in a different outcome. I called Dr. Chen again. I need an emergency session. The guilt is eating me alive. She fit me in the next morning before work. I sat in her familiar office and said, what if this is my fault? What if I broke him by lying about being poor? What if that's what made him think stealing was acceptable? Dr. Chen leaned forward. Eleanor, you've been in therapy with me for over a year. We've worked through this. Your test didn't make Bryce steal. It revealed that he was already someone who would steal. There's a difference. But maybe if I'd been honest from the start, then he would have felt entitled to your money for different reasons. People like Bryce, they don't become who they are because of one parenting choice. It's deeper than that. It's character. And character isn't something that gets formed by a single decision. It's formed by thousands of choices over a lifetime. His choices, not yours. Then why do I still feel responsible? Because you're a mother. Because society tells us that mothers are responsible for everything their children become. But Eleanor, you raised him with love. You gave him opportunities. You sacrificed for him. What he chose to do with all of that was his decision, not yours. The preliminary hearing for Jennifer's mother's case came 3 weeks later. I sat in the same courtroom where I'd sat before, but this time I was in the witness stand. Karen Mitchell was prosecuting again, and she walked me through my testimony methodically. Mrs. Johnson, can you describe your relationship with the defendant? He's my son, or was my son. I'm not sure what he is now. Can you tell the court what happened between you and your son approximately 2 years ago? I told the story again. The money he'd stolen, the accounts he'd opened, the fraud he'd committed. I kept my voice steady and professional, laying out facts without emotion. Across the courtroom, Bryce wouldn't look at me. He kept his eyes fixed on the table in front of him. And your son pleaded guilty to these charges? Yes. He was sentenced to 5 years probation, restitution, and mandatory counseling? Yes. Mrs. Johnson, in your opinion, based on your experience with your son, do you believe he is capable of reforming? Bryce's new lawyer objected. Speculation. The witness can't speak to the defendant's state of mind. Judge Holloway, the same judge from my case, overruled him. I'll allow it. The witness has unique knowledge of the defendant's character. I looked directly at Bryce, then forcing him to meet my eyes. No, I don't think he's capable of reform. I think he sees people as things to be used. I think he believes he's entitled to whatever he wants, regardless of who it hurts. And I think the only thing he's sorry about is getting caught. The courtroom was silent. Bryce's face had gone red, but he still didn't speak. His lawyer tried to salvage things on cross-examination, suggesting I was biased, that I had an axe to grind, that my testimony was colored by my anger at my son. But the facts were the facts. Bryce had stolen from me, he'd pleaded guilty, and now he'd done the exact same thing to someone else while still on probation. Judge Holloway bound him over for trial without hesitation. Mr. Johnson, this court showed you mercy once, gave you an opportunity to rehabilitate yourself. You've demonstrated that mercy was misplaced. Bail is set at $200,000. Bryce's face went white. $200,000. He'd never make that. He was going to sit in jail until trial. His lawyer argued for a lower amount, but Judge Holloway was unmoved. The defendant has shown he's a flight risk and a danger to vulnerable populations. Bail stands. As they led Bryce away in handcuffs, he looked at me one last time. There was no apology in his eyes now, only hatred, pure undiluted hatred. And I realized that whatever small hope I'd been holding on to, whatever tiny part of me that thought maybe he could change, was finally permanently dead. Outside the courthouse, reporters were waiting again. The story had new life now. Financial analyst's son arrested again while on probation. It was sensational, and it was spreading fast. I gave a brief statement through Richard. I'm relieved that another victim came forward before more damage was done. I hope my testimony helps ensure justice is served. Jennifer's mother, Helen, was there too, a small woman with silver hair and tired eyes. She approached me hesitantly. Mrs. Johnson, I'm Helen Mitchell. I wanted to thank you for testifying. I'm so sorry this happened to you. I'm sorry too. Sorry I didn't believe you when Jennifer told me about what happened between you and Bryce. I thought there must be two sides to every story. I thought maybe you'd been too harsh, but you weren't. You were right about him. I wish I'd been wrong. Helen nodded. Jennifer's devastated. She blames herself. She shouldn't. This is all on Bryce. I know. But it's hard not to feel responsible when you brought someone into your family who caused this much damage. I'm trying to forgive her. She's my daughter and she didn't know. But right now, I'm just so angry. That's valid. Let yourself be angry. Don't let anyone tell you you should forgive before you're ready. Helen reached out and squeezed my hand. Thank you for testifying, for being brave enough to prosecute your own son. It gave me the courage to do the same. Watching Helen walk away, shoulders bent under the weight of betrayal, I felt a surge of rage at Bryce so intense it took my breath away. He'd done this. To his own mother, to his mother-in-law, probably to others we didn't even know about yet. And the worst part was, I knew he didn't feel remorse. He felt entitled. He felt justified. In his mind, everyone else was the problem. The trial date was set for 4 months out. In the meantime, Bryce sat in county jail because he couldn't make bail. Jennifer filed for divorce, and it moved through the system quickly since there were no kids, and she could prove financial misconduct. She called me once to tell me it was finalized. "I'm taking back my maiden name," she said. "I don't want any connection to him anymore." "I understand." "Eleanor, can I ask you something? Do you ever wish you'd just let it go, just written off the money and moved on?" "Every day in some ways. But then I remember that letting it go would have meant letting him get away with it. Would have meant the next victim would have been hurt even sooner. So no, I don't regret it. But I wish I'd never had to make the choice in the first place." Margaret convinced me to take another vacation before the trial. "You need to not think about this for a while. Go somewhere. Rest. Come back strong." So I went to the coast to a small town I'd never been to, and I rented a cottage right on the beach. I spent my days walking along the water, reading books, eating fresh seafood, and trying not to think about what was coming. But I couldn't stop completely. My mind kept circling back to Bryce, to how we'd gotten here, to all the warning signs I'd missed or ignored over the years. One evening, sitting on the deck watching the sunset, my phone rang. Unknown number, but I answered anyway. "Mrs. Johnson, this is Grace Kim from Channel 7 News. I'm doing a story on financial fraud in families. Would you be willing to talk to me about your experience?" "I don't think so. This is private." "I understand. But Mrs. Johnson, cases like yours are more common than people think. 1 in 5 elderly Americans experiences financial abuse, and most of it comes from family members. Your story could help other people recognize the signs, could help them protect themselves." I thought about that. Thought about all the people out there who might be going through what I went through, who might be too ashamed or too scared to speak up. "What would you want to know?" Grace came to my cottage 2 days later with a small crew. We sat on the deck overlooking the ocean, and she asked me gentle, thoughtful questions. "When did you first suspect something was wrong? What made you finally take action? What would you say to someone in a similar situation?" I answered honestly. I suspected for a long time before I was willing to admit it. I think I knew years before I acted. As for what made me finally do something, it was when he asked for complete control of my finances. That was the line I couldn't let him cross. And what would I say to someone else? I'd say, trust your instincts. If something feels wrong, it probably is. And I'd say, you have the right to protect yourself, even from your own children. Especially from your own children, if they're the ones hurting you. The interview aired 2 weeks later. It was part of a larger story about elder financial abuse, and they handled it sensitively. They didn't use my full name, just Eleanor J., a financial analyst whose son stole thousands from her. But anyone who knew me would recognize the story. The response was overwhelming. I got emails from people thanking me for speaking up, sharing their own stories of being victimized by family members. A woman in Florida whose daughter had stolen her life savings. A man in Texas whose son had forged his signature on reverse mortgage documents. A grandmother in Ohio whose grandchildren had cleaned out her bank account. Story after story of people who had been too ashamed to report it, too afraid of what others would think. I responded to every single email. I shared resources, contact information for legal aid organizations, encouragement to take action. And I realized something. My pain, my experience, my willingness to speak about it was helping people. It was making a difference. That gave me strength going into the trial. The trial lasted 2 weeks. It was brutal. Bryce's lawyer tried everything. He claimed Helen had given Bryce permission to use her credit. He suggested she was confused about the timeline. He brought up my case and tried to paint me as someone who had turned my son against his entire family. He made it sound like I was the villain and Bryce was just a victim of a vindictive mother who had poisoned everyone against him. But the evidence was overwhelming. Credit card applications with forged signatures, security footage showing Bryce at the bank, IP logs showing him accessing Helen's accounts from his computer. It was the same pattern he'd used with me, and the prosecution laid it out methodically. I testified again this time for longer. Bryce's lawyer tried to shake me on cross-examination. Isn't it true, Mrs. Johnson, that you lied to your son for decades about your financial situation? Yes. You pretended to be poor when you were actually wealthy? Yes. You tested him, set him up to fail. I gave him the opportunity to show his true character. He did. Isn't it possible that your deception damaged your son, made him resentful, made him feel entitled to compensation? If my test made him commit fraud, then his character was already flawed. My test just revealed what was already there. The lawyer tried other angles, but I didn't budge. I'd been through this once already. I knew his tricks, and I had the truth on my side. Helen testified too, crying as she described finding out about the debt, about the fear of losing her home, about the betrayal of someone she'd welcomed into her family. I trusted him because he was Jennifer's husband. I thought he was a good man. I let him help me set up online banking because I didn't understand it. I gave him my information because I thought he was trying to help. I never imagined he would steal from me. The jury deliberated for 3 hours. When they came back, the foreman stood and read the verdict. On the count of identity theft, we find the defendant guilty. On the count of fraud, we find the defendant guilty. On the count of forgery, we find the defendant guilty. Bryce's head dropped. His lawyer put a hand on his shoulder, and I felt nothing but a hollow sadness. My son was going to prison. The boy I'd raised was a convicted felon. There was no coming back from this. Sentencing was set for 4 weeks later. Karen warned me it wouldn't be light. He was on probation when he committed these crimes. Judge Holloway is known for harsh sentences for repeat offenders. He's looking at 8 to 10 years minimum. Will he serve all of it? Probably not. Likely 6 or 7 with good behavior. But Eleanor, that's 6 or 7 years. He'll be 40 years old when he gets out. The sentencing hearing was packed. Media, curious onlookers, and victims. Helen was there with her daughter Jennifer, who looked like she'd aged 10 years in the past few months. I sat behind the prosecution table again in what had become my usual spot. Judge Holloway reviewed the case carefully. Then she looked at Bryce. Mr. Johnson, this court gave you an opportunity to rehabilitate yourself. Instead, you committed the exact same crime against another vulnerable victim. You've shown no remorse, no understanding of the harm you've caused. You've blamed everyone but yourself for your actions. The court has no choice but to impose a significant sentence. Bryce's lawyer stood. Your Honor, my client has suffered greatly from the publicity of these cases. He's lost his job, his marriage, his reputation. Those are consequences of his own actions, Counselor. Mr. Johnson, I hereby sentence you to 10 years in state prison for identity theft, fraud, and forgery. These sentences to run consecutively. Additionally, you are ordered to pay full restitution to the victim plus damages. Do you have anything to say? Bryce stood slowly. For a moment, I thought he might finally take responsibility, finally admit what he'd done. But instead he turned and looked directly at me. This is all your fault. You made me this way. You lied to me. You tested me. You turned everyone against me. I hope you're happy now. Judge Holloway banged her gavel. That's enough. Remove the defendant. As they led Bryce away, still shouting accusations, still blaming me, I realized he would never change, never understand, never accept responsibility. He would spend the next 10 years in prison, still believing he was the victim, still telling himself everyone else was wrong. Outside the courthouse, Helen found me again. Thank you. Thank you for speaking up first. Thank you for showing me it was possible to fight back. I'm sorry we're both in this position. Me too. But at least we're not alone in it anymore. She hugged me, this stranger who had become a sister through shared trauma, and walked away with her daughter. I went home to my little house with the garden and the view of the park. I made myself dinner, poured a glass of wine, and sat on my back patio in the gathering dusk. 10 years. Bryce would be in prison for 10 years. By the time he got out, I'd be 72 years old. Would he try to contact me then? Would he still blame me? Would he have learned anything I didn't know? And I realized sitting there in the peaceful quiet that it didn't matter. His future was his responsibility now, not mine. I had done what I needed to do. I had protected myself. I had protected others. I had spoken the truth even when it was painful. My phone buzzed with a text from Margaret. Dinner next week, I want to hear how you're doing. I texted back yes and smiled. This was my life now. Friends who cared about me, a job I loved, a home that was mine, peace that I'd earned through the hardest choices I'd ever had to make. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't what I'd dreamed of when I first held my newborn son 34 years ago. But it was real, and it was mine, and it was enough.